Well, welcome everyone to Funding Your New Nonprofit. Really glad to have a little bit of an introduction first. And I hope that this session gives you the framework that you need to understand nonprofit fundraising. We're going to be covering kind of the big picture today. So the who, what, where, when, why of fundraising, how it works, and give you some ideas. This is an hour-and-a-half session that we have here together. And so there's no way we could possibly cover every single thing that you might ever want to know about fundraising in an hour-and-a-half, but I'm hoping to sort of give you, again, a framework for understanding and then to give you some resources that you can then follow up. I'm excited to see you all here and from a variety of agencies. I started nonprofit work in 2006 as a volunteer. And I started on the program side, delivering programs. Victim services is my passion in life. And so I loved advocacy, I loved program delivery, but I learned really quickly when I got into nonprofit work that how much good you can do is directly related to the amount of funding and the amount of resources that you have. And so I ended up doing work on the fundraising side, which I really loved for lots and lots of reasons, which we're going to talk about today. But one of the things that I have really loved is being able to connect community resources to community solutions to the problems that we care about, which is what fundraising is. And so I think it's great fun, and I hope that you will too. I hope that today will give you some of what you need. So we will go ahead and dive in. So we've done a few introductions before we started the recording. Looks like we have some folks here that have established organizations that maybe just be looking to revamp their fundraising a little bit, organizations that maybe have not had a strategic plan related to fundraising in the past, and then some folks that are interested in starting a nonprofit and kind of wondering how resource development works. And so I'm happy to have that mix here, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. So this is a little bit of a roadmap for where we're going. We're going to talk about how nonprofits are funded, why fundraising is awesome. I'm a fundraising consultant based in Fayetteville, but serving a large region. And I tell people that I'm a fundraising consultant, and people say, "Oh, fundraising. Oh, I would just rather be raked over hot coals and have to ask anybody for money." There's a lot of myths out there about fundraising, which I'm hoping we'll debunk today. But I think fundraising is awesome, and I hope that after today's presentation, you will be excited about fundraising too. So we're going to talk about who fundraises, who is responsible for fundraising at an organization, a little bit of the nuts and bolts of just how it works, and then some tips for getting started. So for those of you that already have a fundraising program, getting started might just be, like I said, revamping what you do, implementing some new strategies, reaching new donors, that kind of thing. For those of you that are really starting at the ground level, we're going to talk about building your first fundraising program. And then I'm going to provide you with some resources for further information and help. And then we're going to talk a bit too about equity in fundraising, which is really, really critical. Okay, so how nonprofits are funded. I always start with this. I find that there's a lot of misconception out there if you've not worked in the fundraising nonprofit sector before about where money comes from for nonprofits. So it's very typical for nonprofits to start out as volunteer organizations, all volunteer organizations, but it's very hard to run a nonprofit with no financial expenses, right? You have to have money to pay your light bill, to pay your rent, to pay for marketing, that kind of thing, even if you rely very heavily on volunteers. And as your nonprofit grows, at some point you will have to have paid staff if you're wanting to expand the amount of services you provide. So nonprofits are funded through different funding sources depending on the nonprofit. It's not the same for every nonprofit. It depends on what you do and depends on your community. But most nonprofits have philanthropy as part of their fundraising streams, or funding streams, I should say. For a lot of nonprofits, the majority of their income is philanthropy. And by philanthropy, I mean donations, sponsorships. We're going to talk a little bit about the details of those. Many nonprofits have earned revenue or fee for services. So this would be if you're an arts organization and you sell tickets to your exhibition, a performing arts organization that sells tickets, university that charges tuition, healthcare system that charges fees for medical service. That would be earned revenue or fee for service. Some organizations have strategies for other earned revenue, like for example, running a thrift store. that supports the work of the organization, things like that. So some organizations have earned revenue. If you're working in social services, you're going to have less of that than you are in some of those other mission areas that I just mentioned. Government grants or contracts. Some organizations receive reimbursement for services rendered. So for example, if you run a rape crisis center, you are reimbursed by the Attorney General's office for forensic rape exams that you perform. There are also government grants. Higher education institutions get funding in the form of government grants from Department of Education, for example. Usually smaller or startup organizations do not receive government grants or federal funding. That's usually larger organizations. And then nonprofits, some nonprofits have investments, and the income off those investments helps fund a portion of what they do. Some nonprofits use loans for sort of short-term needs. But I would say, philanthropy, earned revenue, government grants or contracts are really the big three. And today we're going to talk about philanthropy. So that's really what we're focused on today. Okay, so sources of philanthropy. What we mean when we say philanthropy, donations from individuals. So these are individual community members that are writing you a check or donating online. Volunteerism is a source of philanthropy. So when we talk about philanthropy, we're not only talking about cash income, but we're also talking about donation of time. So people volunteering with your organization. Also donated goods or services. So a marketing firm donates design work, for example, to your organization would be an example of that. Sponsorships or support from corporations and businesses. That's often tied to events, but not always. And then grants from foundations. So these are not government grants that we're talking about here, but these are grants from grant-making organizations, which are mostly foundations. The Fayetteville Public Library has a really, really terrific Find It, Fund It workshop that they do every year on how to find foundations whose missions align with your organization. They also provide basic grants training on a regular basis, as does the Grant Professionals Association. We're not going to talk quite as much about grants today because if we're talking about starting a new nonprofit or sort of building a fundraising program from the ground up, we're really talking more about donations from individuals and businesses. But I'll provide some resources later to direct you to where you can find out more about grants. And then donations from civic and community groups, also church groups, things like that have giving circles or that have outreach missions or some sort of philanthropic purpose. There may be others, but these are really the big ones when you're thinking about what money is in the community and what time is in the community and what resources are in the community, expertise in the community that might support what you do. So now I would like to ask a question. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a minute so that I can see the chat. I would love to know what you all think of when someone says fundraising. So if we're talking about when someone says the word fundraising, what does that mean to you? Positive or negative strategies, anything that comes to mind. Go ahead and drop that in the chat. I would like to start there. I'll give you just a minute or two to do that. Okay, Amelia says events. Lots of people think of events as being the primary method of fundraising. That's really common. Crowdsourced campaigns. That's become a big source of donations in recent years. Finding ways to ask people and businesses for money. Galas and silent auctions, again, going back to events. Okay, awesome. I would love to know, this is my second question. I would love to know if you have a positive or a negative reaction to fundraising. When someone talks about fundraising, does that get you excited or does that make you feel stressed? I'm always interested in what people think. Drop that in the comment box if you don't mind. Okay, we've got a lot of votes for stressed. Okay, you're in the right place. I'm glad you're here. Amelia says both. Wonderful, okay. So let me get back to sharing my screen. We're gonna address some of those. Just a moment. So I always ask this question because I think that there's an element of fundraising that's intimidating to people, and I think sometimes that comes from myths about fundraising. I think a lot of times people find the process intimidating, or we don't like talking about money, right? So we don't want to talk about money. So I want to talk a little bit about what fundraising is. Fundraising is not about money. It's about the people you serve. It's about the community. I've been a fundraiser for 13 years this year, and I spend very little time talking about money. I spend a lot of time talking about the people in our community, which is us, right? Everyone. What kind of services or programs or resources or ideas would make our community better? How we can work together to accomplish that. It's always a conversation about, what kind of art exhibition would be appealing here in our area? What kind of food assistance would help uplift our neighbors? What kind of educational programs would help the next generation of leaders come up? What kind of housing families need in hospitals when their kids are hospitalized? Those are the conversations that it's about. And everyone that I meet that works in the nonprofit sector, of course, has a very specific passion for your organization, for the work that you do, for the mission that you are working toward, whether you're a staff member or a volunteer. We have those passions. And so fundraising, what I love about it is it gives you, constant opportunities to talk about the work that you do, and all of those great ideas that we have for making our community a better place. And so I would encourage you to try to make that shift, that fundraising is not really about money. Money is the tool that we need to accomplish some of that. Volunteerism, volunteer hours are a tool that we need to accomplish ideas, but it's really about our dreams for our community, and getting other people excited about those dreams, wanting to see those dreams happen. That's what it's all about. And we all love that. I mean, I hope that I can speak for all of us that we all love that, right? So this section I'm just entitling Why Fundraising is Awesome, because again, it's where ideas meet resources, right? There are lots of ways that we can make our community better, but unless we have the resources to actually make it happen, it won't, right? Fundraising is sort of the wings to your ideas, if you want to look at it that way. And I have seen one of the things that I think people don't understand who haven't fundraised before is that, fundraising is something that is transformational for a community on both sides, right? So people that benefit from services have transformational things that happen as a result of those services. And also people that are involved in supporting those services have transformational things that happen. And so fundraising gives everyone an opportunity to be involved in what you do, which is so important because nonprofits are owned by the community. They literally belong to the community and they benefit the whole community. One of the things that I think makes fundraising intimidating to some people or uncomfortable, and people have shared this with me, is that some people think of fundraising as setting up like an us versus them thing, right? Like there are this segment of people who are donors and this segment of people who are clients, and then it's awkward to try to juggle the two. And it's really not the way it works, because we all benefit from nonprofit organizations. Like we are all clients of nonprofit. It would be hard, I think, to go through your whole life without being a beneficiary of a nonprofit organization. You all are beneficiaries for sure, because you're here and the library is a nonprofit organization, right? And so it's a great opportunity. Fundraising provides a great opportunity for the community to rally around something that benefits all of us, which is awesome, which is fun. And I am always inspired and amazed by people who want to be involved on sort of every level. And so if you are not actively fundraising, if you don't have a really active fundraising program, you're not giving people the opportunity to be part of the amazing work you do. And there are people out there who want to be part of the amazing things that you do. Okay, so this is the secret about fundraising that I think a lot of people don't understand. So this is like the first key thing, is that people want to give. Giving philanthropically, whether we're talking about giving time, so volunteering, or whether we're giving talent, our professional services, or skills, or whether we're giving treasure, whether we're giving our money, writing a check. Either way, people want to give. because again, we want to be involved in something bigger than ourselves and something that makes our community better. It's not like trying to twist people's arms into doing something that they don't want to do. People are out there who want to give. One of my very first development jobs in my career, I worked for a women's shelter, and I started in December. The organization hadn't sent out a year-end appeal, which is a standard thing to do. And so when I started in December, I was like, oh, we got to get an appeal out. Like, we haven't done one. We just need to get it out. So we sent out a fundraising appeal. It wasn't the greatest appeal I've ever written because we were doing it on such a short time frame, but it was just important that we needed to get it out because I knew that, people need to be asked, people need to be remembered and given the opportunity to get involved. So we sent out this appeal. I knew almost none of the organization's donors because I was brand new. I had only been on the job like a week or two. And we got many gifts back from that appeal. But one of the first ones that came back was a check for $25. And there was a note in there from one of our donors who I didn't know, who said, the entire note just said, "Thank you so much for remembering me. I really needed to write this check." And it was a great education for me that donors want to be involved. They want to be remembered. Fundraising is relational. It's not transactional. Good fundraising is relational, not transactional. And I think that's something else that people don't understand about fundraising is, transactional fundraising feels very, very uncomfortable, right? But it's bad fundraising. Good fundraising is relational. Like, you have relationships with the people who support you and they want to be remembered and involved. And so I was glad that I got that appeal out, even though it was not the, smoothest, most polished appeal I ever did. But it was a great reminder that, we have donors that want to be remembered, in her words, which were her words. So Giving USA is an organization that studies charitable giving in the United States every year. Every year they come out with a summary of charitable giving from the year before. I cannot wait to see 2020 summary. I'm going to be fascinated to see what happened during the pandemic. But this is the most recent that they've published. So 2019, Americans gave $450 billion to nonprofits. I don't love the word charity, but nonprofits. And that is a huge amount of money. And people aren't giving because they didn't want to, right? Giving is part of who we are. Philanthropy is really an American institution. And you can see this pie chart right here. This is where generosity came from. So this is of all of now this doesn't count volunteering. This is just financial donations. So of all the money that was given, donated to nonprofits from the private sector in 2019, 69% of it was from individuals. That's just individual people writing a check or donating online. 10% was bequest. So that's people's estates. So that's individuals too, really. So 79% of all the money just comes from people giving. 17%, that purple piece you can see, is foundations. That's grants. And then 5% by corporations. So some people come to me and say, okay, we need to start a fundraising program, or we need to be more strategic about our current fundraising program. So we need to go for grants and sponsorships. And grants and sponsorships play an important role in a fundraising campaign, but 79% of the money that's out there is individuals. So if you are a small organization, if you are volunteer run, if you don't have staff, or you only have one staff, if you don't have a whole bunch of time, focusing on individual gifting is your best bet. And that's really what we're going to focus on today in this presentation, is how to create fundraising plans that are focused on individual giving. Because again, most of the money that's given in the US every year comes from individuals. Individual giving is also the most stable source of funding. So if you rely on grants or corporations, foundations and corporations change their giving priorities. And so maybe they have funded you in the past, but maybe their giving priority is different this year. Or maybe, some just by custom don't fund organizations every year. Grants are usually very time limited. Sponsorships are a one-time thing. Whereas if you have a base of donors who are used to giving to you all the time, it's much more stable income, which will support your work a lot better. So all these pieces are important, but I just wanted to point out that number one, we like to give, people like to give. And number two, individual giving by individuals is really the best opportunity for you. Okay. So here, the Lilly School does, at Indiana University, does studies on charitable giving in the United States as well. This is the most recent data they have, is that a little over half of Americans invest in the nonprofit sector. So again, these are people who want to give. And in Northwest Arkansas, statistically, that's about 285,000 people. So you might look at how many donors your organization has now, and think about that number. So not everyone that gives is going to be interested in what you do specifically, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. You want people who are really passionate about what you do specifically. But there are plenty of people in our community that care about what you do, or would care if they knew about you, or would answer your call if you asked for support. I think sometimes in the nonprofit sector, we tend to operate in a mindset of scarcity, which, you know, we don't have enough money to do what we need to. Payroll is coming up, you know, we've got to pay our light bill. What are we going to do? But there are plenty of people in the community to support you. It's just a matter of being strategic, of making sure that you're asking. The number one reason people don't give to nonprofits is that they aren't asked, right? So just being sure that you're asking people for support, and doing it all the time. You know, not waiting to start fundraising or to focus on fundraising until you have some sort of financial crisis, right? You need to fundraise all the time, every day. If you're a staff member, every day. Average giving in the U.S. From the same year, from 2016, $25.14 per household. That's average. The American South gives the most in terms of how much of people's income they give, percentage of their income given. And then we know that high income and low income philanthropists are more generous in the middle class, again, in terms of the percentage of their income that they donate. And then in terms of volunteering, so all that we just talked about is financial gifts. So we also love to volunteer. This is Arkansas specific. Almost 700,000 of us in Arkansas volunteered last year. So that's huge. And then their service, and this is 2019 as well, their service has an estimated economic value of 1.7 billion. So again, same concept. There are people out there that want to give to you. It's just a matter of connecting them with the right opportunity. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. I would love to know kind of what your reactions are to that, to the idea that people want to give. Did that jive with your personal experience? When I put those statistics up there and talk about how philanthropic we are in this country, what does that say to you, and what is your reaction to that? I'll give you a minute to put it in the chat. Or if you have questions, clarifying questions, please put those in the chat too. Surprised that the middle class gives the least. That's true. And we're going to talk about equity and fundraising. One of the things that you for sure want to do at your organization is make sure that you value donations of money the same as you value donations of time, that those are equivalent. So, and we're going to talk about how to value volunteer time. But the upper class tends to give money, lower class tends to give time. And so, but again, those statistics I just gave were financial donations. So the lower classes give financially, you know, generously as well. Amelia says, seems on trend with my experience in schools and disability nonprofits I've worked with. Our board has been very focused on grants and sponsors. That's very common. It's very common, especially if your board members work in the corporate world, very common for them to be focused on corporate giving, which is not a bad thing. You want them to help you raise corporate support, but individual giving definitely is the most opportunity for you out there. Let's see. Very excited to shift my thinking from focusing on money requests to businesses to fostering relationships with individuals. Yeah, and this I think is where like I always say fundraising starts with fun, right? And the reason I love fundraising is that I love building relationships, which is what fundraising is, right? Gail Perry says fundraising is making friends to change the world. Like I love relational fundraising, which is the fundraising as it should be done. And I think maybe that shift will help you feel more positive about fundraising or see the opportunities there. Relational approach is much more my speed, for sure. Yeah, and for a lot of people that work in the nonprofit sector, I mean, we are relational, right? We are relational. That's why we're here. And fundraising is an opportunity to use our skills. I have always felt like fundraising is a good fit for me personally, because like building relationships is what I'm all about. And so it's a perfect fit to just say, hey, go build relationships in the community for the benefit of, the mission that we serve. Super fun. Helpful to reframe my thinking, giving people an opportunity to be involved in what we do. Yeah, and that's important because not everybody can support you in the same way or wants to support you in the same way. Some people really prefer to volunteer, like they want to come in, they want to be hands-on, but there are other people that care just as much about what you do, but maybe it's easier for them to write a check or to donate, a service from their business or something like that. So I think one of the things that's also important is to think about how many different kinds of opportunities you offer people to get involved. Do you just offer one type of opportunity that's only going to appeal to people that fall in that bucket? Or are you offering really a wide range of opportunities that people can plug in the way that's comfortable for them, that they like to do? So that's important. Okay, thank you for sharing those perspectives. Let's go back to our presentation. Okay, so this is something to think about. If we were in a room, we might share this and do this as a little group activity, but I just wanted you to think about this. Probably all of you have experience as philanthropists. I'm just guessing, which means that at some point in your life, you have donated time, money, or services or expertise to a nonprofit organization. And so I would encourage you to think, number one, why did you do it? What caused you to give? What prompted you to give? And then number two, how did that experience change you as a person? If it didn't change you at all, then the organization didn't do their job, right? If you had a positive experience in giving, it's probably because the organization involved you, educated you, helped you in some way, or that you saw the benefit of your involvement. And so I think these two questions are really important to think about for ourselves. I talk with a lot of people who are like, oh yeah, I volunteered, I grew up in a community center after school, which had programming, which was super good for me. And now that I'm an adult, I go and volunteer and it is so awesome and I love it. It's my favorite thing. Well, you have proof that philanthropy is important to you, to the community, right? But sometimes those same people will say, oh, I don't want to fundraise. Ooh, that sounds icky, even though their experience with philanthropy is so positive, right? People who donate funds the same way. I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that victim services is my particular passion in life. It's because I've had 3 friends in my life die at the hands of their abusers, the people who were supposed to love them. My money goes largely toward victim services, and it's not a coincidence, right? It's important to me. And even though I'm chasing after my 2 children and running 2 businesses, I don't have time to volunteer as much as I used to in the program services. But now, I'm at the point in my life where I can write a check, and it is super important to me to do that. Super important to me to hear from those organizations about what their clients are going through, what the community needs, what opportunities there are for me to financially support what they do. And I'm not anybody's major donor, but it's still important to me, right? It's personal. And probably your experience in philanthropy is probably personal to you. So think about this as a fundraiser for your organization. You want to give that experience to other people. Like, you want to offer that experience to people out there who need it. It's very common for people to give because they want to give back to an organization or to a cause that benefited them, because their friends or family members have been affected by this issue, and they want to do something. Very common for people to want to give because they want to meet other people who care about the same issue that they do. So there are, for example, monthly giving programs that organizations convene groups of people who give a monthly gift of any amount, and those people get to meet each other. It's a little harder now for COVID, but still, those people get to meet one another, and that's meaningful. You build your social circle of like-minded people, and that's meaningful. So, you can build community at the same time that you build your resources. And so I would just challenge you to think about these two questions, and then think about how you can provide that same experience in your community. Your organization revolves around your clients, of course, but if supporting those clients is a positive experience for the community, then they will continue to support you. So that's just something that I would love for you to think about and give some thought to. Okay, so now that we have talked a little bit about people want to give, philanthropy is a positive experience if you do it right. Fundraising is relational, not transactional. Good fundraising, I should say, is relational, not transactional. This is the fundraising cycle. So this is a little bit of kind of the bare bones of how it works in fundraising. And fundraising looks different for every organization. You know, the strategies that you're going to use are dependent upon what your organization does. If you're a community center, maybe you have a basketball tournament, right, is something that you do. If you are a organization that does something that people don't quite understand, maybe you have monthly lunch and learns. And that's tied to your fundraising as a way of educating as well as raising resources. You know, different groups in the community who have a natural inclination to what you do. So the methods of fundraising are going to vary depending on what your organization is. Also depending on the size of your organization. You know, what an organization with a 10-person development team and 100 volunteers can do is a little bit different than what you can do if you are the only person, you know, on staff at your organization, and you're also responsible for program delivery and everything else. So the specific methods are going to vary, but the general steps in fundraising are the same, no matter what method of fundraising you choose. So the first thing is to identify people in the community who care about what you do or would have a reason to care about what you do. In fundraising, we call these prospects. That's just a dry fundraising term, which I'm giving you because you're going to hear it. But basically, it's just who in the community cares about what we do. So if you work for 4-H, who are these people? Well, they're the families of the kids you serve, right? They're people who have been through the program before, people who went through the program when they were kids, you know, people in the communities where this program is really has a lot of inroads. If you are the Clinton House Museum, for example, one of you said, you know, you probably have a potential donor base that is of a certain community, a certain political community, right? That are your prospects, your donor prospects. If you run a preschool, right, these donor prospects are people whose kids are in your school, have been through your school, grandparents of the kids in your school, businesses that cater to kids and families. Those would be the people who would naturally care about what you do. So think creatively about who does your organization impact in the community, and those are the folks that you're going to want to talk to. And there are two things that are important. Number one, that they have reason to care about what you do. And number two, that they have the ability to give, right? And we're talking about giving time, talent, or treasure, right? Any of the three. So one easy way of doing this, I mean, this usually starts with your board of directors, right? The board of directors are always your donor prospects, right? And they should all be giving one of those three things to your organization. So start with them. Who do they know that is a natural, you know, prospect? We're here at the Fayetteville Public Library for this. I mean, the library's patrons are the library's donor prospects. Those are the people, of course, who understand the benefit of the Fayetteville Public Library. Those of us that are there every week, like, we are the natural donor prospects for the library. If you're a healthcare system, your patients and patients' families. If you're an educational system, your alumni. You know, if you have kind of a built-in audience, those are the people that are going to be your donor prospects. So you identify those folks, who those folks are, identify them by group or by community or by individuals, depending on what your fundraising plans are. And then after you identify them, you cultivate and involve them. Cultivate is another dry fundraising term. It just means that you get them involved somehow and educate them about what you do. So this could be, you know, somebody at the organization takes them to coffee. This could be you give a presentation to their group. This could be they come in for a tour. Whatever is appropriate for what you do, you involve them somehow. So you can get creative with this. This can look a lot of different ways. So it just depends on your mission and what's appropriate for you. But you want to involve them. You want them to really understand what it is that you do, why it's important, and who it is that you serve. And during the cultivation process, you should also learn a lot about the donor. Like why does this donor or this group of donors care about what you do? What's important to them? Now, your programs are always going to be community-centric, client-centric. You know, you're always going to design things for the clients, but it is useful to know what the donor's interests are, because they may be more interested in one of the things that you do than other things. When I worked at a women's shelter, for example, we had a shelter program where we provided safe shelter for people fleeing domestic violence. We also had an art therapy program that serves children. We had a transitional housing program. Well, different donors were more interested in one or the other of those programs usually. So if I was talking with someone who really had a passion for kids, you really wanted to help kids recover from violence, like we would be talking about the art therapy program, and they would come in and see the art therapy room, and we would talk about, how we know this program works, how the kids react to it, why we do what we do. You want to educate and involve the donor in the part of what you do that is most appealing to them. And they'll be a good prospect for that part of what you do. So cultivate and involve. If you don't have a facility that you can bring in people into, or you don't have, or if you're just starting out and maybe you don't have a lot of something to show, then this is going to be a lot more relational with the people that are in your leadership. So this is going to be a board member taking someone to copy. This is going to be, a lot of conversations with people. You might meet the donors or donor group where they're at. So there's a lot of different things that could be involved with this cultivate and involve phase, but basically you are involving them and educating them, right? So then after that process has been happening, after you feel ready, ask for support. So this is the part of fundraising that makes people anxious, I think. And this is the part, a lot of times when I talk about fundraising, this is the part that people think of, right, is the ask. I don't want to, makes me nervous to ask for money. It makes me nervous, or anxious to think about asking. I don't like to talk about it. But really, if you have done the cultivate and involve portion of this cycle well, the donor is expecting you to ask them for support. That's the whole point, right? If you have been cultivating and involving them, like the donor should be ready to contribute somehow, some way to what you do. And usually in the cultivate or involve phase, I just ask people, this is the program. We're in the process of raising funds for this. Would supporting this program be something you'd be interested in the future? And they can tell you yes or no. Yes, I would love that. We usually do our charitable donations in November. Why don't you just ask me then? Okay, great. I put it on my calendar, right? Or they say, no, we're not really in a position for that, but maybe we'd like to volunteer. Awesome. Can we ask for your volunteer support? I'll get our volunteer coordinator to be following up with you about that. So you just ask people in the cultivate stage if this is something they'd like to be involved in the future, and then they'll tell you yes or no. So when you get to the ask, you already know that they're interested or not. And if they're not, you're not going to ask, right? So ask for support. Then you, assuming that you have received what you've asked for, the gift, then you thank and thank and thank and thank them, and report to them on what their giving has accomplished. Right? You made an investment in this program. This is what this program has done for people in our community this year. Thank you so much for being our friend, for being a friend to our clients, and for caring about and strengthening our community in this way. And then the cycle starts over again. You don't have to identify people a second time, right? If they're already a donor, you already know them. But then you just go from the thanking phase into the cultivating and involve phase, and then you ask again in the future. And the timeline for that depends on the donor. Some donors want to give one gift every year. Some donors like for you to ask for their support, for various things throughout the year. Again, that's very dependent upon the donor. But this is still the cycle, right? You thank, cultivate, involve, ask, thank, cultivate, and involve, ask. And the ask is very easy if you have done the other stages well, right? And again, this goes back to fundraising is relational, not transactional. If you're just asking for support, putting their money in the bank and never talking to them again until the next time you need to ask for support, then clearly that's bad fundraising and uncomfortable, right? Nobody wants to be treated like an ATM, right? So most of the work that you do in fundraising is this thanking, this cultivating, this involving. It's just building relationships with people. I mean, it's kind of just relationships 101. So there's research out there on how, again, this is very dependent on the specific donor, but in general, how much time you spend in each of these phases. So I just made this little pie chart based on the research. On average, I mean, this is the amount of time that you spend in each of these phases per donor, right? So you can see the vast majority of the time is just getting them involved, keeping them informed, thanking them for their support. The ask, which is the part that gives people hives, I think sometimes is such a small part of the process. An important part, but such a small part. Really, fundraising is relationship building. And so if you feel like you that's in your wheelhouse, then you're going to be a good fundraiser and you're going to like it. You're going to like it. So I would love to know what you think about that fundraising cycle. I'll give you just a minute to put some thoughts in the chat if you have them. Is that different than what you thought fundraising is? Does it match your experience? Does that make you feel any better about fundraising? I would love to know what your thoughts are. I'll give you just a minute. Nobody has any thoughts? Very clear, crystal clear. Makes it seem easier, right? Actionable steps. Mm-hmm. And again, you'll be in different phases of that process with each donor at all times, right? You'll be helping identify people that might want to be involved while you are making the ask of another donor that you have a relationship with, while you're thanking the donor that gave last month. So this cycle, you're always in different parts of the cycle with different donors or different donor groups. But the cycle is always going, right? Oh, I love it, Lindsley. Logical, compassionate, connective, empowering, and sustainable. I'm gonna embroider that on a pillow. Yes. Yes, that's exactly what fundraising is, which are all the reasons that I love it, honestly. And I have met so many people, and I have so many relationships personally with people who I met because they want to change the world in the same way that I want to change the world. And it's just wonderful to get to spend your time with those people. Sounds like a good deal of time might be needed to be dedicated to tracking prospect supporters' preferences of involvement. Yes, yes. So a lot of fundraising is just keeping all the balls in the air. And we're going to talk about that here in a minute. But yes, that's exactly right. Just keeping all the balls in the air and keeping the organization moving forward is a lot of the work of fundraising. Because as you can imagine, it would be easy to drop a lot of those balls, right? Someone gives you a check, you're like, whew, all right, we're going to pay the light bill next month, and then you forget about them, right? Just bad fundraising. So yes, having a plan, having a process by which you involve people is really critical. Tracking info and prospects. Do you have any big spreadsheet? So here's the secret, and we're going to get to this later, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you now. The secret is that you need a donor database. Even if you are a small nonprofit, even if you are brand new, even if you don't have many donors yet, you need a donor database. And there are a bunch of them out there of various costs. Most of them have a tiered cost pricing system based on how many donors you have in them. So if you're just starting out, you can get one pretty inexpensively. And it is just so critical to have a donor database, because a donor database is where you put all your information about your donors, including their contact preferences, including when they've given, the gifts that they've made, notes about why they care, all that kind of stuff. And the donor database can run reports for you. Who gave last year that hasn't yet given this year? Or, who are our top 10% of donors in terms of resources given to the organization? Again, resources of money and time and everything else. Who are the people who live in this particular geographic region where we're going to pilot a program? Who are our donors in this area that would care about this? So important. So we're going to get to that. But donor database is what you need, even if you are just starting out. Invest the money in a good donor database, because it will pay dividends for you in the amount of so much more money that you can raise if you have good records. I work with a lot of organizations that have had lots of support, and they have forgotten who all their donors are, because one person had a spreadsheet, but that person left the organization. But I had this spreadsheet, but it has some of the donors on this other spreadsheet, but not all of them. I mean, they don't know who their donors are. They don't know, because they don't have good donor records. And what I like to do is I like to add up all of the dollar value of all the gifts that those donors that they've forgotten about have made. Like, if you just asked the current donors, your donors have already given to you, you would be raising $60,000 this year. This is the money you're leaving on the table because you don't have good donor records. So really, really critical to invest in a donor database. Okay, moving on. And then, of course, it's really important to familiarize yourself with the ethics of fundraising. So one organization that I totally love is Community-Centric Fundraising. You can Google them, find their website. They are an organization that promotes equity and social justice in fundraising. Really, really encourage you to spend some time with them. The Grant Professionals Association Code of Ethics is for specific to grants. Association of Fundraising Professionals is an organization that provides fundraising training and networking. They have a code of ethics and a donor bill of rights, basically how you treat your donors. So those are some of the things. There are other ethical codes out there, but those are 3 to check out. But they all basically the same thing, which is that be honest with all the parties involved. Use donor money as the donor intended. So if the donor gives you a gift for program A, you cannot turn around and spend it on program B, right? Treat all people involved, dignity and respect. Donors are partners. Again, relational, not transactional. Valuing volunteers and financial donors the same is really, really critical. Time is as valuable as money. So just check those out as you're looking into your fundraising program. And then, of course, this is the reason I love fundraising. The more money you have and the more resources you have, the more volunteer hours you have, the more of your mission you get to do. Which is what we all want, right? We all want to do more. Okay, so who fundraises? This is a question I get asked a lot. Who is responsible for fundraising at an organization? So, okay, now we understand what the cycle is. We understand what fundraising is. People want to give, but who actually makes this happen at an organization? So if you are on the board of an organization, which several of you are, it's you, right? If you are a paid staff member on the if you are an executive director at an organization, it's you. If you are development staff at an organization, if you're with a larger organization that has designated development staff, then of course it's you, right? The leadership of an organization is responsible for fundraising. Always, always. And you think about this, you know, nonprofits and for-profits are different, but you think if you're running a for-profit, you care very much about the organization's revenue, right? Revenue is a big part of your job, ensuring that the business has revenue, right? Well, nonprofits are the same in that respect. The people in charge of the organization, both the board and leadership staff, are responsible for making sure the nonprofit is funded. It's everybody's job in leadership. So commit to fundraising, right? Whether you're a board member, whether you're a staff member, think of yourself as a fundraiser. Don't think about fundraising as something that, I'm going to have to do that like now because we have this thing that's coming up that I have to pay for, and then I'm going to forget about it and pretend that never happened, right? Think of yourself as a fundraiser, right? If you raise money at all in any capacity, you are a fundraiser. So be a good one. Commit yourself to it. Fundraise every day. The more you do it, the easier it gets and the more you'll love it. Again, relational. Learn as much as you can. You all are here for that, which I applaud you for. Continue to learn. Get a mentor who is a fundraiser or who has been a board member who's a volunteer fundraiser. Talk with your donors about why they care. Like, this is one of my favorite things to do is if you have an established donor base, whether that's 5 people or whether it's 500 people, either way, find your donors, take them to coffee, ask them why they care, and ask them what their experience has been with your organization as a donor. You will learn a lot that way. It may be positive or it may be negative, but either way, you're going to learn a lot. And what your donor wants out of their relationship with your organization. And then focus on, again, fundraising is not about money. It's about people. Focus on what you're going to do with the money that you raise. Like, because of this fundraising, we were able to, certify 15 extra nurses in our area. And that's going to, improve patient care for our community. Or, because we fundraised this, we were able to provide scholarships for kids to attend these camps. And these are kids that would not have the opportunity otherwise. Or because of these funds that we've raised, we're going to be able to put on an exhibition of artists from historically underrepresented communities. Whatever it is that you're doing, that's the point, right? And keep that in mind. This is a big one. The board must commit to fundraising. I do a lot of board trainings with a lot of organizations where the board does not want to fundraise. Again, they think it's transactional, which is uncomfortable. They're uncomfortable and anxious and stressed, just like some of you shared. And it's because they don't understand fundraising and what it is. But again, the board must ensure that the organization is funded. The board, even if you have paid staff, the board still has to support fundraising, and that all the board members have to be involved in resource development, which means that they all must play a role. Now, they don't all have to ask directly for money. Sometimes board members can be involved in the cultivate phase, can be involved in the thanking phase, can be involved in other stages of fundraising. Remember, fundraising is that entire pie chart we looked at, not just the ask, but all board members need to be involved in some way. One of the things that I used to do when I was an executive director with a board is that in October every year, we would call all of our donors, every single one of them. And we had many, but we would commit to calling them all. And so I would assign each board member 3 or 4 phone calls to make. And the only purpose of those phone calls was just to say, thank you. You know, we accomplished this together last year and your support was so important to us. Thank you so much. That was all. Well, board members loved making those phone calls because they'd get somebody on the phone. That person would be like, oh my gosh, yes, your organization is so great and I love it. And it was so great and I can't believe you called me. Thank you. Blah, blah. It was a great experience. And board members were like, oh, well, yeah, I could do that. Right. So it may involve setting your board up for success and plugging them in the way that they want to be. And board members must give. All board members must give. Now, they could write a check. They could give hours, and not just the hours they're showing up and approving your meeting minutes. That's not what I mean. Like hours moving, doing something outside of just the bare minimum of board service. Giving their time, writing a check, bringing resources to the board. All board members must, because the board members set the example for the rest of the community, right? And board members can't ask anybody for something that they don't do themselves, right? I can't go ask somebody to invest in the organization if I don't, right? Board members must participate. And then you want to recruit, and this is a whole different topic we could talk all day about, but you want your board to represent a really wide variety of skills and a really wide variety of communities that you serve. The board needs to reflect the demographics of the people you serve, and they need to be people who can advise you on making decisions that impact all those different communities. And so when you're recruiting for your board, keep that in mind, that you want board members with different skills, different talents, different relationships, different communities, different lived experience in your service area. And then I think it's really, when it comes to board fundraising, I think it is super important to outline expectations in advance with your board. Like when you recruit your board members, make sure they know fundraising is a priority for the board and all of our board must be involved in fundraising. Show them the pie chart. You don't have to ask for money. Not all board members have to ask, although you need to have a few that will. You can be involved in one of these other steps, but all board members must acknowledge the importance of fundraising, first of all, and be involved somehow. And then have board members themselves identify what way they want to be involved. You know, which of these steps, which of these strategies, which of these activities would you feel best about being involved with? I think having that conversation on the front end is much better than just showing up to a board meeting and say, hey, this consultant said you guys have to fundraise. All right, good luck with that, right? You have to provide them with the professional development, training, support to set them up for success. And then also your donors. Your donors can really help you fundraise. Share your fundraising plans with your donors. Ask for their advice on, we're thinking of implementing this strategy. What do y'all think about that? Get some of your board members, for example, that give to your direct mail campaign that you want to revamp, that maybe is antiquated, and ask them, what would make this more appealing? You know, we're looking at really redoing some of this. Get together a little focus group of your donors and have them give you suggestions. If they feel invested, they will help you raise money. Okay. I'm checking my time. Okay. So here are some tips for getting started. Like I said, this is not a comprehensive, here's everything you need to know about fundraising presentation. But let's say that you are sitting there, you're like, okay, fundraising sounds not quite as bad as I thought. This sounds like it might actually be kind of fun. And okay, I'm going to commit to being a fundraiser. So what do we do, right? Okay. So the first thing is committing to fundraising, and that starts with you, right? Again, people can be involved in a variety of ways, right? Any effective nonprofit organization is led by people of all different backgrounds and all different skill sets, right? So it does not make sense to expect everybody to do the same thing or play the same role or plug in the same way, right? So be sure when you're planning your fundraising program that there is ample opportunity for everyone to provide input into what your fundraising strategies are, what you're planning, to provide guidance on what they think would work best in their communities. or with their social group or whatever. And then make sure that you have a variety of opportunities for people to plug in. Because usually if you give people kind of a menu of options, right? Here are all the things that would really support this fundraising plan. Which of these sounds most appealing to you? And people like when they get to choose, right? Ooh, I don't like that. Oh, but this I love, right? Here's my dirty secret. I don't like fundraising events. They stress me out. I don't like being in crowds of people to begin with, just as a general statement. So like helping with event fundraising is my very least favorite thing. I don't like it. But if you need someone who will, take these 4 or 5 donors to coffee and get to know them, I love that. I will do that. Right? So on the other hand, you'll have some people that love events. It's their favorite thing. Those people need to be in charge of that, right? So plug people in where their natural skills and natural interests are. And I really love having a board contract. So when you recruit your board members, have it in writing what you expect from them. Our expectation for board members is that board members will attend 75% of our board meetings. Our expectation is that you will serve on 1 committee at least. Our expectation is that you will make a gift to the organization of time, treasure, or talent that is meaningful to you. Just outline it. And that way everybody understands on the outset. And then for people who don't feel like they can commit to that, but are interested in supporting you, have another opportunity for them to plug in. Have other volunteer opportunities. Okay, maybe board service is not the best fit for you, but we also need volunteers for this. Don't reject anybody's involvement unless there's an ethical issue with it. But provide different volunteer opportunities and focus your board on people who are going to commit to fundraising and resource development. And again, we're talking about raising money and volunteer time and resources, other resources. Okay, so educate yourself, very important. So, if you are a staff member, if you are the executive director, you are your organization's chief fundraiser. At all organizations, large and small, the top staff person is a fundraiser, the chief fundraiser of the organization. If you are on the board, you are responsible for fundraising on the board. Even if there's a development committee on the board that leads fundraising efforts and you're not on it, you're still responsible for contributing in some way. Okay, so educate yourself is first. The Nonprofit Resource and Small Business Center, newly named, is such a great resource. When I was a new fundraiser, I read book after book after book after book after online resource after article after everything from the Fayetteville Public Library. It's a great, great, great resource, and we are so lucky to have it in our community. So make great use of that. The Association of Fundraising Professionals is an international organization of which we have a local chapter that provides fundraising training and networking. That's a great resource. The Grant Professionals Association is specific to grants, but we also do some broader fundraising things related. We have a Arkansas, Oklahoma chapter of that. This is our website. Community-Centric Fundraising, Equity in Fundraising, I already said. And then these are some books that I love and really recommend to help you get started. So after the presentation today, if you think, oh, I would really like to see an example of this, or I wonder what the details of this look like, these are great. Amy Eisenstein's book, 50 Asks in 50 Weeks, is a book that is specifically about getting it all done when you have a small shop and you don't have a lot of staff. Like, how do you just make sure that you're getting your asks out the door, that you're cultivating those relationships, that you're doing all those stages of the fundraising cycle, like making sure that you are actually just getting it all done. Great, great book. Easy book, very short, very easy. The Development Plan by Linda Lysakowski goes into a lot of detail about like what's in a fundraising plan, like what does the document look like, what needs to be in it. I really recommend that one. And then Fired Up Fundraising is about board fundraising. And if your board is reluctant about fundraising or nervous about fundraising, I'd really recommend everybody read that book, or at least you read that book. She has some great advice for turning transactional fundraising into relational fundraising specifically. And then some other books that I love too. And then Kelly is also going to send out the link to this presentation. So you will have this if she hasn't already. You will have this. So recruit and train a fundraising board. We already talked a lot about this. I think we've already covered a lot of this, but be strategic. That's kind of the bottom line. And board training, like support your board. The board technically does supervise the executive director. They are your bosses, but if you are a staff person, it's an opportunity for you to lead up because you'll have the experience and the expertise. So provide your board with the support they need to be successful. Okay, and then create a development plan. So this is a little bit where the rubber hits the road, and I'm not going to go into great detail about this because Linda's book and Amy's books are excellent, and I'm just recommending them to you. But having a fundraising plan is critical. So sit down with your board and executive staff, decide what you need to fund. You know, what are your program needs? What's the community needs? What is your reason for needing money, right? Because you're going to change the community in XYZ ways. Figure out what you need. Figure out what you raised last year. So, you know, it's always good to start with kind of like your baseline. So what kind of money did we bring in last year? What money are we going to need to bring in this year? Make sure that's realistic, right? If you raised $10,000 last year and you're going to raise, you know, $3 million this year, it's probably not that realistic, right? Even though we could all spend $3 million in a heartbeat on the needs of the community, right? But you want to have an increase that is reasonable. And then outline specific strategies. Exactly how are you going to do it? We're going to do a direct mailing, you know, and an integrated marketing campaign that's going to involve, you know, social media and email marketing and a direct mailing. That campaign is going to raise $10,000 in the fall. You know, we're going to start promoting that earlier in the fall. We're going to start kind of cultivating our donors for that earlier in the fall. We're going to have a major gifts campaign that we're going to launch in the spring. We're going to try to secure 5 major gifts. You know, that's going to bring in X amount of dollars. Like break it out by strategy, and then, you know, add the total strategies, dollar goals together, and you get the total. Volunteer support should be part of that development plan too. Again, how many volunteer hours are we going to need for what purposes? You know, who are our logical prospects for raising that kind of volunteer support? Put the timeline in there. If you develop a plan like we're just going to do this year, but there's not a timeline in there, you won't do it, right? Because you're busy. Make the timeline specific. Say who is responsible for what. That's really critical too, especially if you're an all-volunteer organization. And then your plan should be focused on individual giving. Can include grants, can include sponsorships, but again, 79% of the money out there is held by individuals. Board appeal should also always be in your development plan, that the board should have a formal process at the beginning of the year by which they pledge a certain amount of support. Again, time, talent, or treasure. And then make sure that you have a stewardship plan in place. Again, there's a lot of information out there on creating stewardship plans, including in the Nonprofit Resource Center. But the stewardship plan is basically what happens when a donor gives you money or time or donated goods or services. How do you react? How do you involve that donor? How do you follow up with that donor? You know, how do you treat them? And that's the relational part of it, right? And that may feel, if you're a relational person, it may feel very dry to like put that in writing. Like the executive director is going to call this person a week after their gift and talk to them. The board chair is going to take them to coffee the month after that. That may feel very technical to you, but when you have a lot of donors, like you need a plan in place to make sure that you do it, to make sure that you cultivate those relationships. You have to have good financial management procedures. This is not a presentation about that, but of course, you've got to be sure that you can manage people's money responsibly. So do that first if you don't already have that. And then you must have a donor database. I've already made the case for that. So I'm going to see if I can. Kelly has put in the chat some more about the Nonprofit and Small Business Resource Center. I'm going to see if I can share a sample development plan with you. Here it is. So this is only one option. I mean, there's no standard for how your development plan needs to be formatted or anything. So this is only just one consideration. But this would be like a sample development plan for a smaller organization. So increasing your fundraising capacity might be your number one thing. So if you don't have a donor database, if you don't have a stewardship plan in place, if your board has not been trained in fundraising, those are things that you want to do first, right? Lay the groundwork first. And again, Kelly is going to send this out to you. You will have this document. And then raising money in private funds to support the organization's work. So put a dollar amount here that you're planning to raise and base that dollar amount on your strategies down here. Monthly giving, I'm a super big fan of monthly giving, having people sign up to give a monthly gift to your organization. That can be automated through technology. It's money that you know is coming. You want to be sure to involve those monthly donors in a very strategic way, right, to keep them involved. But that's, regular income that you don't have to resolicit. You basically, that fundraising pie chart that we looked at, all you have to do is just the thank part if you have them set up for monthly giving, right? Because you don't have to solicit them again. I'm a big fan of that. So monthly giving program is something you might consider. Major gifts program is something you should have. So you get to decide what you consider to be a major gift, and organizations define that a bunch of different ways. A small organization, $500 might be a major gift and above. At a university, it might be $50,000 and above. Just depends. It's usually about the top 10% of your donors. Like if you put all your donors in order of value of an annual giving, including volunteer time, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, then your top 10% would be your major donors. But you can define it however you want, but you should have a strategy just for them, right? To make sure that you are involving them. And then down here, annual gifts. Again, you all are going to get this document. You can look at it in detail later. Annual gifts are gifts that are smaller than major gifts. So that's everybody else. And a lot of times, annual gifts are kind of a donor's first entry into your organization. So the first time I give to an organization, I might send $20 to an organization and see how they treat me, and see if I hear back from what they've done with it, or see if they tell me what the impact of that giving was, like what services they've done in the community and what the community impact is. And then if an organization engages me in that, I'll give more. So your annual fund are people that are kind of getting to know you a lot of times. And finally, organizational gifts would be foundations, corporations, churches, civic groups, that kind of thing. So you can see that this kind of plan just outlines, here are all the strategies we're going to do. This right here is a really critical column. Who is responsible for it? Who's going to do it? What's the timeline for it? What's the budget for it? Meaning what it's going to cost you to do if there are costs involved. What the income is. This is the amount of money that you're going to raise through this this strategy. So this is really great if you're an organization, if you're any organization, but especially if you're a smaller organization, because you can everybody involved can just pull this out every week and see, okay, what's on the development plan for this week. And then if that week passes and it hasn't been done, then you need to say, hey, we are behind on this. Let's come up with a plan. It keeps things from falling through the cracks, because it's so easy in development work when there's so many balls in the air just to lose track of stuff. And especially if you're working with board members who are volunteers, they've got full-time jobs, perhaps families they're raising, elderly family members they're caring for, other volunteer opportunities, their church. I mean, there's so many other things that it's easy to just lose sight. So having a fundraising plan in place will really help with that. Again, you're going to get this document. I've sent it to Kelly to share with you. Okay, go back. Okay. So I get asked a lot, how do we set our goals? Like, how do we set these fundraising goals? How do we know what we can do? There's no just perfect answer to that. When you have a fundraising program that has been in operation for several years, meaning you've had the plan, you've implemented the plan, then you're going to have a really good idea of what are realistic fundraising goals, because you'll set them based on the needs of your clients and based on what you did the last year. But if you have never had one before, I would still look at, if you have an organization that is already in existence, I would look at what you did last year. Even if you didn't have a formal fundraising plan, like how much money did you just raise just because people were giving to you? Unsolicited gifts. Consider your board members. How much do your board members think that you can raise? That would be a really interesting thing to know. Ask your donors, right? We're implementing our very first fundraising plan ever, and we're just like talking to our donors about what they feel like is realistic. What's our reputation in the community? What do people think of us? Where are avenues we haven't reached into yet that we could? Like, gather that information. You can benchmark against similar size organizations that are doing similar things as you, and set goals for each strategy, like dollar goals or volunteer hour goals for each strategy. I talked about including volunteers in this. The independent sector publishes the value of general volunteer time every year. You can look up that current rate. I think it's $27.20 currently. Independent sector is who does that. So you can, if you had 200 hours donated to your organization, multiply it by that hourly amount, and that's the financial value of volunteers. If you have professional volunteers who are donating professional services, then you usually count that as the value of those services. So like if a marketing firm would ordinarily charge $5,000 for the work they did for you for free, it's a $5,000 gift, for example. Or you can also set the value, the financial value of your volunteer hours based on what you would pay someone to do the same work. So if you have staff and volunteers who both do some of the same jobs, what's the hourly rate that you're paying staff? And that you could assign that value to the volunteer time. So there's no hard and fast rule, but you do want to have a value of your volunteer time because you want to include it in the resources that you're planning to raise, and you want to treat people that donate time equally to people that donate money. So if someone writes a $1,000 check, but someone shows up and volunteers enough hours that are worth $1,000, those are equivalent donors, and it should be treated the same in your stewardship plan. Okay. And then another question I get all the time is, where do I find donors, right? Where do I identify prospects if we're doing that identify part of that pie? Your existing donors are always your best prospects. So before you do anything else in fundraising, if you're creating your first fundraising plan, start with your existing donors, meaning people that have given to you before. They are always your best prospects because you know that they care about you and that they have the capacity to give. So start there. Donor retention is bad across the nonprofit sector, meaning many nonprofits don't have the same people giving to them year after year after year. And it's just because they're not asking or they're not involving. It's transactional, right? They're not doing a good job of that relational fundraising. So make sure that you have really strong relationships with your existing donors. Like, they are always the people to start with. And then once you are satisfied that you are doing the best possible job you can with your current donors, then branch out and try to find new donors, right? If you look for new donors and you're gaining new donors every year and every year and every year, but then they give to you once and then you're forgetting about them, you're leaving so much money on the table and you're doing a bad job of fundraising. That's transactional, right? Make sure that your fundraising is relational. And so that starts with your already established donor base. Your board should all be donors to your organization. Former clients, now if you work in social services and you serve a really low income population, you may focus on volunteerism, or if you serve a population that is in crisis or in transition, you may not have as much of this, even though we know, again, philanthropists of all levels give generously. But certainly, like if you're an arts organization, if you're a healthcare organization, if you are a educational institution, if you are anything kind of like that, like your clients are going to be your donors. There's going to be great overlap between your client population and your donor population. Social networks of board and donors. So if you treat your donors really well, they will spread the word, right? They will spread the word about how they feel about your support. Have like a series of lunch and learns. If you're an educational institution, like, if you're a preschool, like have a lunch and learn on a different parenting topic every month, and people that come open to the public, and people that come to those would be, prospective donors, prospective supporters. You can also have like meet and greets kind of thing to give people an opportunity to come see what you do. So these would not be things where you're asking people for support at this event, but it would be an opportunity for you to cultivate donors, right? And identify who is interested in what you do, who has shown up to these events, and then you would follow up with them to ask if they are interested in learning more. Foundation Directory Online is an online directory of all foundations in the United States. It is a great resource. Fayetteville Public Library offers you this resource for free as a patron of Fayetteville Public Library, and their librarians can teach you how to use it. Again, find it, fund it workshops at Fayetteville Public Library are awesome. So that's where you can find information about foundations, is through Foundation Directory Online, through the library. You can buy a private subscription too, but it's really expensive. And then the snowball effect. Like if you do a good job at relational fundraising and treat your donors well, again, they will help you find more donors. They'll spread the word. On the flip side, if you treat them badly, they will also spread the word. So think really hard about how you're treating your donors. Okay, and then so once you have this fundraising plan in place, right, then it's just a matter of executing the plan. And there has to be somebody that drives this bus. So if you have an executive director, it's you. It's you that drives this bus. If you have a development director that works under the executive director, then the development director might be more responsible for like the day-to-day. But your executive staff should be the ones that are making sure that everybody involved is doing what they've committed to in this plan to keep it moving forward. If you don't have any staff, if you're an all-volunteer organization, then somebody on the board needs to volunteer to drive the bus, to be the person that tracks the organization's progress. Because if you have this plan and everybody has a different piece of it, but nobody is like following up and making sure that you're doing it, it won't get done. Right? So somebody has to be the accountability person of, hey, have we done this yet? Hey, what's the progress of this? Hey, do you need any support? I'm doing this since this is coming up. Like somebody has to be that person. Check the plan weekly. Make sure that you're on track. Follow up with people on their things they've committed to do. Communicate all the time. This is just sort of project management 101, but it's super important. And then you want to evaluate at the end of usually organizations have a development plan that's annual. Did we meet our goals, our financial goals, our volunteer goals? You know, did we achieve our targets? It's okay if you don't, right? I mean, if you try something and it didn't work, it's okay. You know that doesn't work. Move on to the next thing. Or if there's some approach that didn't quite work, can you change it for next time? Fundraising is kind of an experiment because even though there are some tried and true ways to fundraise, meaning building relationships, every organization's donor base is different. Some of the clients that I work with are hugely successful at raising money through social media. Others, it's like crickets. They are really successful through direct mail. Others are really successful with like giving clubs or giving circles. And it kind of depends on the mission that you do and who it appeals to and what those people's lifestyles are like and how they like to be communicated with. So it's okay to experiment. You haven't failed if you didn't reach your goals. You've learned valuable information that will help you make your development plan more stronger for next year. What did you do that worked really well? Capitalize on that. If something that you did was just really successful, can you do more of that next year? And then build on your successes. You know, fundraising is a long-term view. Fundraising is about building a sustainable income source long-term for your organization. So even though you're doing annual goals, take the long-term view of building relationships with the community so that the community supports you and is there for you. Okay. And then one last thing, which is very important, is equity in fundraising. As you're building your fundraising plan, be sure that you are thinking about building equity and building social justice strategies into your plan. Super important because nonprofits exist, many nonprofits, most nonprofits exist to support better equity in our communities, right? To make sure that we all have the opportunity to thrive and the resources that we need to thrive. So you should think about this when you're building in your fundraising plan. So some things that you might consider, making sure that your board really represents the clients that you serve, the community that you serve, right? So all the different demographics that you serve should be represented on your board so that those people can help inform your program decisions, inform your resource allocations, and inform your fundraising strategies. Focused on community-based solutions, meaning that the needs of your clients should drive everything you do. And as much as we love our donors, they are not the point, right? Our clients and our community are the point. So everything should be tailored toward what's going to better the community. And the input on what those strategies are should come from the community that you're serving. Value donations of time and money equally, we've talked about that. Provide different strategies for different kinds of donors, different opportunities. We talked about that. That's an equity thing, right? You want, no matter who you are and no matter what resources you have to donate, we want you to have a place at our organization. So make sure that you're providing a variety of opportunities and that all those opportunities are valued by the organization. Ongoing training and discussion around diversity, equity, and inclusion and biases is really important for your board and your staff because that really informs everything your organization does, including fundraising. And then finally, just a shout out to Community-Centric Fundraising, which is awesome. And then finally, the last thing, I love Brene Brown. If you've not read her books, I strongly recommend them. But she is all about the power of vulnerability. And embarking on something new, as you all are thinking of doing, is an exercise in vulnerability, right? You have to be willing to learn something new, to try something new, to put yourself out there in a way that you haven't before. But I think you will find that if you focus on relationships, relational fundraising as it should be done, you will find that that's transformational, not just for your organization, but for you as a professional, as a person. So if you feel stressed or a little bit anxious or a little bit nervous, learn all you can, build your support system, get the support you need, and then just try it. because I think you will find that you like it more than you thought. And then this is me. Feel free to follow up with me if you have questions. Again, I'm a consultant based in Fayetteville. I do a lot of work with grants and other kinds of fundraising. Here's my website. I'm on LinkedIn. Please connect with me on Facebook. I would love to learn how you took anything that you learned today and put it in practice, or any questions that you have. So I think that is my time. And I've run you 1 minute over. But if you have time to stick around, I'm happy to answer questions if you want to drop them in the chat. I know that I took us right up till the last minute.